Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source. I'm Isaac Levin. I am really excited for my guest today. We're going to have a great conversation, talk about some really fun stuff, and maybe learn a little bit along the way. So, I have my coffee, and I'm excited to talk with my guest today. My guest is Morgan Bell. Morgan, do you want to say hello? Introduce yourself?
Hello, world. I also have my coffee in my nice little Microsoft Azure mug. Keeps it very warm. So I am a program manager on our student advocacy team at Microsoft that's under our developer relations org. It's a super fun role getting to work with university students around the world, helping teach them about technology and what it's like working in tech and showing them the things that they may not be learning inside the classroom, like cloud technologies. Um, so it's a lot of fun getting to hear from students, getting to work with them, mentoring at hackathons, you name it. Um, but it's also really rewarding to see what they get out of it as well. I always tell people that I think I get fulfillment out of my job by seeing people get that aha moment, when somebody finally figures out something for the first time. I know I love getting that feeling. Most recently with Wordle. I don't know if you've been playing Wordle, Isaac, or if you're still like
Uh,
anti-Wordle just to be anti-Wordle. I was like that for like 4 whole days.
yeah, we can talk for an hour about Wordle. So I play Wordle. I do not
Okay.
broadcast how terrible I am at it because I'm definitely
Ah,
not. I'm not as good as I would expect myself to be. I don't. I feel like I have a fairly decent vocabulary. I don't want to cheat. I imagine there's a lot of people that cheat. There's
that
plenty of
takes away all
tools
the
out
fun.
there. Yeah.
Well, of course,
Um,
yeah.
but no, but if you're doing it for the brags, I mean, I think also one thing that's very interesting about Wordle and a lot of these similar games that have been viral for a moment is that it really gives you an idea of like what people enjoy doing with like their throwaway free time. Like, oh, I'm gonna play a little game on my phone or on my computer in between meetings or whatever, and I think that's kind of cool. Um, but yeah, I think Wordle is definitely interesting. I'm excited to see how long it lasts. Not excited, I guess isn't the right word. I'm interested to see how long it lasts, just because these things
The
typically
craze.
don't. Yeah, they don't last forever. People eventually
Mm-hmm.
get kind of tuned out of them, um, and yeah, I think it is fun. Yeah, what has been your experience? And I'd love to talk a little bit about kind of the learning experience too, for like you're talking about your work. But I want to talk specifically about things like Wordle and things that help us kind of decompress from work because I think that's interesting too. Um, like, do you? I'm guessing you use Wordle as like a helps you, you know, obviously it's a time. It's not like a time suck because it takes like 5 minutes, but it does kind of let you decompress and reset your brain, right? Which I think is super valuable.
Yeah, and I actually end up doing mine not during work hours. It depends if I have
Sure.
insomnia at night. So sometimes it'll be right after midnight when it gets released. And then sometimes, it'll be in the evening after work. Uh, for me, it's actually a good way for me to kind of engage my brain in a different way. It's kind of refreshing, I think, to use a different part of your brain or skill set
Yeah.
just because my work isn't that analytical day in and day out. But I've always, loved words. I loved English and everything in
Mm-hmm.
school. And so it's kind of fun for me being able to say, like, okay, well, the patterns of language. And so let's try to solve based on that. I try to do them in my head instead of writing anything down. So it's that extra challenge. And I'm also competitive against myself. So you say 5 minutes, and I'm usually on it for a lot longer. But
Sure.
that's because I really try to minimize the number of, lines I have to use.
Yeah.
So it was fun doing it. Well, at first when I saw everybody doing it on Twitter, I'm like, oh, this is another one of those things that'll last a week, and I was like, I'm not doing this. Well, then I gave it and I did. I was like, okay, this is fun, and I actually introduced my entire family to it. We have a group chat, and now every day my entire family does it, and then once everybody sends their results, then we can talk about like, oh, can you believe they had double L's at the end of that word?
Yeah.
For anybody that plays, what was that, 2 days ago or whatever? And so it's also just a fun way to kind of like stay in contact with people, especially during the pandemic. We're always looking for different ways to do so, and so it's also a fun way to kind of uh, touch base with folks. And I think that's really I want to say the beautiful thing about it, because that sounds a little too maybe inspiring for a basic word game, but it's, I think, finding the joys in the little things, and just appreciating them while you have them, even if it is a fad.
Yeah. No, it is very interesting too. Like, and it's a community building thing. I don't know if that was the initial intention or it's just to be like, oh, here's a fun game that people can play. But like whenever, like towards the end of the day, when most people have kind of solved their Wordle, like there's always like these threads where it's like, oh, I didn't know, and there's like some spoiler alert stuff for people who haven't started out yet or haven't played their version of it. I just think
Yeah.
the concept is really cool. The same problem for everybody, and we all have to solve it in whichever mechanism we enjoy doing it, which I think is kind of cool.
That's actually a really good point too, as far as community goes, because I mean, we're you're in the Pacific time zone, right? I'm in the
Yes,
Pacific time zone, and so we are one of the last to get it released every day, and it'd be very easy for somebody on the other side of the world to ruin it for us.
sure,
Spoilers. And so it's also been kind of cool to see like the community respect one another in that way of not giving things away or like, making those, oh, I didn't see that double L coming at the end. But instead being like, oh yeah, that one was rough today. And so also like props to the community for, letting each other enjoy something, I guess. It
sure,
sounds kind of sad, but really it does matter. And I think Wordle started, I was reading an article because I'm a nerd. The guy that made it, he actually just made it as like a really basic app, which we all know, and we've heard the stories of the copycats and everything.
yeah,
But he made it, I think, for his partner who enjoyed playing word games, and so he put together a big list of 5-letter words and had it for her just to be able to play around with the different words and letters and everything kind
yeah.
of like as a gift. And so that's really where I think the simplicity comes in, and that's what makes it so great. I don't have ads popping up on my screen everywhere and this and that. It's simple, it's basic, it's humble, it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, there is something to say. Do you remember? I can remember the game where you swipe numbers down. Do you remember that game? It came out
Oh,
probably like 2 or 3.
1046, 1026.
Yeah, one of those type of games. Like I remember that game when it was very very viral for a small amount of time, and like it's people used it as an opportunity to kind of like brag at how fast they were doing it. But I don't see that
Yeah.
with Wordle as much. I see people bragging that they got it done and like, hey, like I got lucky today. Everybody seems to
Yeah,
think that they're very lucky in doing it. And
it's true.
I was on TikTok yesterday, and a linguist came across my For You page or whatever it's called, and they were like, "Hey, this is the word. These are like the 4 or 5 words that you should always have as your first guess in Wordle, because they contain the most used consonants, the most used vowels in the English
Hmm.
language." And it's like all this strategy, and he has like that particular video has like 5 million views on TikTok or something like that. And I thought it was funny because it's like you didn't really think about like obviously you want to guess like you want to use words that have like the most S's or T's or R's or A's or whatever. But I didn't think of like an initial strategy of like, okay, this word and then this word and then this word. I imagine a lot of people probably think about it like that, but I just like, oh, this is a word that has this letter in it, and that's why I probably don't do very well on it.
I was gonna say perhaps I'm too competitive because I definitely was thinking through like a Scrabble board, which numbers have the one on it, so it's the least number of points in Scrabble, but they're the most frequently used, and it's like that for a reason. So anyway,
Yeah,
it's
no,
fun,
it's
the ever evolving strategy and sharing them with other people too. My mom actually asked me the other day. She's like, okay, I have to ask, you had this letter in the right place, it said it, but then on your next line down, it showed up as, one of the black tiles.
yeah,
She's like, why didn't you reuse it? I was like, well, because I already knew that was there. I'd rather discover other
yeah,
letters and see where those are, even if I know that letter wouldn't be in the right place. And she's like, oh, that's really smart. So it's also kind of cool, building
yeah.
off of each other's ideas with it.
Yeah, it's so funny how something as simple as like just having 6 guesses for a word has turned into like this thing. At least in tech Twitter, and I don't venture very far out in other places other than tech Twitter. But I'd imagine that it's probably viral everywhere. But it just seems to
If
me
you're seeing it
like
on TikTok, if you're
yeah,
seeing a linguist on TikTok talking
yeah,
about it,
it's
I
probably
would guess
pretty
so.
yeah. It is
Yeah,
it is pretty fun. It is pretty funny how stuff like this just kind of picks up.
it
Um,
is.
And we can continue talking about Wordle for the entire hour, like I said, but I would love
I
to
think
kind of
people get
get
bored.
no. There's enough people that actually play Wordle that might be like, oh, maybe I'll find out something. Maybe as Morgan has some really, really good insight as to play Wordle, and you never know. Um, but yeah, I think yeah, one of the things I would love to talk with you about, especially as you know, so a little bit of inside baseball. Morgan and I used to work closely together when I was at Microsoft. We both work in Azure marketing, um, and you know, made this change to kind of move over from kind of Azure marketing, you know, reaching out to different tech communities to kind of this developer relations role, trying to focus on students. And I would kind of love to know like what was some of the your process in that, and what kind of made you really interested in kind of student advocacy.
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, people are always like, it's the journey, it's not the destination. Well, I kind of knew what I wanted my destination to be at some point when I started at Microsoft about 5 years ago, and I was initially hired on as a PM under DevDiv, which is our developer division,
Mm-hmm.
working as a technical program manager on our dev tools, specifically Azure DevOps at that time. And it was funny, they hired me in for the role, but I didn't come from a CS background. So it's like, yes, please put the probably least technical PM on the developer tool team.
Sure, sure.
Great, great idea. I don't know what recruiter thought that would be kind of fun or funny. It all worked out. I learned a lot. Um, but I realized that I wasn't really using my whole skill set and all of my,
Sure.
strengths. I was constantly building on my uh, weaknesses, I suppose, or just my skill sets that weren't as developed. Uh, but I did want to look for something new. And the other thing, too, for me is team culture is really, really important. I spent a lot of time building the culture in that team with all of the devs and everything else. Loved them dearly. But also having a manager, I think that you align with and
Yeah.
can really trust in everything's important. And we did have a management switch. And so I think to me, that was kind of my signal. That was the universe telling me, like, okay, now's your time. And I had taken the opportunity when I was in DevDiv to join a mentoring ring, and I think you know Jacqueline Russell. Do you, Isaac? I can't remember.
That name sounds quite familiar.
Okay,
Possibly.
she's the principal PM for Microsoft MakeCode, which is Microsoft's block-based programming curriculum for elementary school students. And then it's cool because it actually goes from block-based to JavaScript. You can actually toggle back and forth between them, and they have tutorials and stuff. Make cool code's really cool. Um, but she was the mentor of this mentoring ring that I was in with other early in career women. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. She could work on something education focused because I had always been really passionate about STEM education, gamification. How do you get people excited about things? How can you help people learn things without realizing they're learning it? I don't think I would have gotten into STEM without some of the gamification experiences that I had. And so actually, when I was volunteering or whatever else, I found myself doing it for those sort of causes. And it was really that reflection moment of, well, if Jacqueline can do it as a part of her job, maybe I can too.
Sure. Yeah.
So I interviewed around. I did my due diligence. I interviewed for, there was one role I interviewed for that was a top secret security clearance role at
Ah.
Microsoft. That was pretty intense. I ended up obviously not going that route. It would have been a very different career experience.
Sure. Yeah.
And the only role I applied to outside of engineering was for this one role in Azure marketing because they were
Mm-hmm.
looking for somebody to come, you know, have a focus on student developers, at least as a part of their role. I was like, well, I'm not a marketer, but
Sure.
let's try. And I think that's the beautiful thing that people don't realize about developer marketing in a lot of ways is most of us have worked with developers or built dev tools or are developers ourselves or whatever it may be. Because, and that's one of the things I love about developers and just respect is they're themselves. And if
Yeah.
you're trying to, talk to them about something that's inauthentic or something that's not good, you're going to get called out. And I love that about the developer
Yeah.
community. And so they're like, well, you have, this background that would be a great addition to the team. So I moved over to Azure marketing, and everybody's like, that's weird. You go from engineering to marketing. I'm like, yeah, I know. Thank you. Rub it in a
Yeah.
little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Um, but my manager was awesome. And so it was really what I was looking for in that next stage of my career. went over, I felt like I was still in Microsoft, and I felt like I had not only changed companies, but maybe like industries and everything else. All of the jargon was different, all of the acronyms were different. People talking about, all the field and the sales and everything else. Well, before I was in my little engineering team, was one product building out features for that. And so just the scale and the scope changed so much. And it was really cool to, I think, see more into the business and how not only Microsoft operates, but really more on like the global dev scale.
Yeah,
And that opened my eyes to being like, okay, I don't know if I could ever go back to working on that smaller scope
sure.
of being a technical PM, which some people love and thrive in. Uh, but for me, I like working on that bigger scale. And so I had worked with our student advocacy teams. I'd worked with a lot of the folks in developer relations. And I always knew that my next role or what I would want to look for was in developer relations because for me, being a technical program manager was a little too far swung this way.
Sure.
And I definitely didn't see myself in marketing for life. I learned a lot, but
Sure.
you know, and so that would swing a little too heavy this way. And advocacy kind of lands right in the middle.
Yeah.
You work with both of those teams, you're developing things and interacting directly with, developer communities, but at the same time, you are thinking larger scale. You're looking across kind of the whole portfolio and really helping people with what they need and not just one thing or the other. And so I think that's kind of how I found my way, or at least had that mindset of, okay, whatever I do next is going to be advocacy related. And then during the pandemic, the student team I'd worked with before on student zone at Build that we developed,
Yeah.
hackathons, etc. They're like, we need a PM.
Yeah.
All right, let's do this. And I've been here ever since and just love it. It's kind of cool how all of those different experiences build on each other, even if they're very different experiences. Foundationally, they're all about being customer obsessed, I think, and that's really the beauty behind it, even if the day to day is not the same in each of them.
Sure.
But yeah, so anyway, I love being in the advocacy space and working with people, and I don't know, I feel
Yeah. I
pretty
mean,
lucky.
yeah. I mean, you hit a lot of things that I think are really, really interesting. I'd love to dive into a couple of them. Like you mentioned,
Yeah.
kind of how developer relations is the kind of this child, I guess you could say, or this kind of creation from like product based work, which talking about features and talking about how you can get usage numbers up or get drive awareness for your stuff. And then you have this marketing aspect, which is all about messaging and figuring out ways to really like incentivize sales to do things and incentivize communities to do things, right? And
Mm-hmm.
developer relations kind of just sits in the middle, regardless of where developer relations is. Like from an organizational standpoint, like their goal is very much the same across like every organization. Like we want people to use these tools in a way that it makes them going to be the most successful, and it's about awareness driving. And you said
Mm-hmm.
one thing in particular that I thought was very, very interesting about the fact that swaying one way or the other is very is could be a problem, right? Is for some people, especially like if you have, I can't speak for everybody, but I get a little ADD when I have to focus on like one particular thing for too long, right? And I kind of yearn for that feeling of like, oh, let me work on as much stuff as possible, especially being somebody that's technical. Like I totally like buy into your standpoint of like devs have like complete BS meters. Like they will literally say, "This is not good. I don't like this. Never show me this again. I'm going about my way." Right? And I talk about this all the time, and people don't think devs are like the people who aren't as close to some developer communities. They don't really realize how devs literally don't want to do anything except write code. Right? Like
Well,
developers that live in dev communities. Like
yes.
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 Yeah, you have a response. Go ahead. I would love to hear it.
I was going to say, I know many devs that want to do more than just write code. Uh, but
Sure.
I do get your point that it comes down to um, they are very passionate about what they do. And if they're out there trying to learn about something and the content or the docs are not up to par, that's when they're going to let you know because you are impeding on their learning. Or if
Yeah.
you're building developer tools or you have APIs or a platform or whatever it may be, if you're making it so they can't be productive or they can't do the things they need to do, then yeah, of course, because these developer communities, whether it's enterprise, startup, citizen developers, whatever it may be, um, they need that kind of help and empowerment.
Yep.
And so, yes, at the end of the day, it is typically about coming back to code. But I think that's actually a something that surprised me about working with developer communities, and especially with student developers, is the more people I see coming into tech, the more I see with a spread of passions. They
Sure.
don't have to just focus on one thing. And I think it's a little bit of like a generational change in a way because a lot of them still feel like they have to hide their artistic side or they have to do
Yeah.
this or whatever. It can only be on the side. And, you're here and you're being paid to code, which, may be the case in some instances. But I've met a lot of really cool devs that, they do make fantastic artwork or whatever it
Yeah.
may be, and they've started using it as a new medium to reach different audiences. I think of our friend Nitya. I think of
Oh
my
yeah.
friend Dasani, um, who has also been drawing, cartoons and everything. I know she's been working with Nitya on some sketchnoting stuff as well. We should totally drop their handles into the chat at some point. I'll leave that to you. You're the expert here at multitasking, but it's cool seeing those passions come together. And in a way, I kind of feel like that's what I've done too, is taking my passion for tech, helping like empower people, but then this, you know, kind of selfish passion for STEM and, wanting to be able to work in that field, but also in tech. And so I've found that intersection as well. So I think it's just kind of interesting, and I do like to encourage all devs to explore things beyond just development, and that's easier said than done. But
Yeah, I mean, so I'm gonna make a very bold statement. I think
okay.
your typical developer, if they're just slinging code, they are artists too. And my reasoning is because I see art as just a means to express yourself, right? So whether the way you choose to express yourself is by acting or creating music or drawing or sculpture, like it's all about the feelings that you have and expressing them in a particular way. There's very beautiful things that you can do with code, and I know that sounds really really cheesy, but I think in general, like in order for you to be like a very complete developer, you need to be able to think in artistic ways. That's why I think you see a lot of developers that have like you said other artistic type skills. They play music, maybe they do stand up comedy, they they draw, they do other things. Like because I think typically developers have like this flow of artistic like behavior. Not to say that every developer should go and be make sculptures, but at the same time, I think whenever you're producing something with an idea in your head, or you're given a set of requirements, and you have to build something with just a piece with just some requirements on paper, you do need to have like this critical thinking or this way of building a framework.
Hmm.
That's just me, and I know that that probably discounts a lot of people that are in the art space that are like, what I do is so much more important than just voicing my or just expressing myself. But I think in general, yeah, I think being a writing code, especially if you're writing front end work, if you're doing front end stuff with like
Hmm.
HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you need a lot of right brain behavior, right? Like you need to be
Yeah.
able to accurately convey, you know, user experience in ways that are aesthetically pleasing. Otherwise, nobody will ever go to your website.
Well, people might because they're stuck using it, but you'll just have really, really bad
Yeah.
user satisfaction. But don't get
Yes.
me down a route of bad user experiences.
Yeah.
But yeah, I actually love what you touched on there with art. My One of my thoughts when you were talking was how funny would it be, you're interviewing to be a software developer and you've got the classic, whiteboard interviewing questions or whatever, and then they ask you to draw, uh, you know, draw your family or draw what you care about most in
Sure.
life, and you've got these crappy stick figures everywhere because that's me.
Yeah. No,
Um,
that's
but
me
I
too.
I do think it's a form of art. I mean, there's no one way to code, and I think that's what makes it
Yeah.
so interesting too, is that you can get to the same outcome in so many different ways. And I don't know if that's true for a lot of other things in life. The other thing I wanted to comment on that you had me kind of thinking about, I went to a conference probably my first year at Microsoft, an external one, and the lady's talking and she starts it off like, okay, raise your hand if you consider yourself to be creative.
Mm,
And technical conference and everything, everybody's kind of looking around like, like, well, I don't draw, I don't paint, I don't
sure.
do anything like that. So that's what we thought of as creative. And so was it a little bit cheesy at the start?
Yeah.
Yes, but I think it painted a good painted a good picture.
Sure.
How's that for a metaphor in this
Very
case?
good. Very good.
Um, but I thought her take on it was really interesting, that you have to be creative to work in these different spaces. You have to
Hmm.
be able to problem solve. You have to come up with new solutions. And I know in my work, that's something that I have um, come to terms with, is I am creative. And that's because I'm constantly having to come up with uh, new ways to engage with our student developers, new ways to create content that's useful for them, coming up with ideas for new events, especially during the pandemic and everything being shifted virtual. We never had to do stuff like this before. I mean, sure,
Yeah.
maybe some like sales webinars or whatever. I never did any of those, but
Sure.
it's a, how do you do this engagement and how do you be authentic? And that takes a lot of creativity and a lot of customer understanding and a lot of trying and to be frank, a lot of failing, but learning from those failures. And so for anybody in tech that doesn't think they're creative, I would definitely go and argue with them and tell them that they are, whether they believe me or not.
Yeah, I like again, you just said a handful of things that just really stand out to me. Like I think in general, and this like I think this has probably been even more um showcased over the course of the last 2 years during the pandemic where people are having to rely on non-traditional mechanisms to communicate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're seeing whether they're tech influencers or just people who want to reach out to different communities, like they're using things like the platform that we're using, right, to be able to talk to each other. They're building all sorts of really creative content, and they're not traditionally like creative people. Like we have friends that they are very, very good at just making great content, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it requires a ton of just problem solving skills, artistic ability. Like even though you're not drawing or doing these things, but like I need to create a piece of content, and this is why I love marketing so much. I need to create a piece of content that resonates with a particular audience. I can't just record myself talking and then maybe share my screen and sound really monotone and not do anything interesting and just post it out there and get
I mean, you
upset that
could,
I yeah, of course you could. But you can't get upset that that you have like no interaction, right?
right?
So you need to figure out ways to interact with your audience. You want people to come to you for the information they're looking for. You want people to feel safe and feel comfortable and enjoy the conversations and the things that they're consuming, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's way too much content out there. People will just move on. And that's why you see like a lot of web tutorials. People are, they're learning how to do all sorts of crazy things with graphics and they're sharing their screen doing a whole bunch of coding exercises because that's what people really want to see. They want to feel like they're involved in the process.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And I think that that's even another undervalued skill set, is the people that can do that, that can not only understand, the
Yeah.
technical level, right? But then understand the content and the scenarios that people need, are then able to create that content, but then are able to teach it, because that teaching is a whole other ballgame, right? And being able to show relevant examples. And I think that's one of the things that I just absolutely respect about, a lot of folks in DevRel, whether it's somebody in marketing or somebody in
Yeah.
engineering or whatever it may be, um, or, people that are live coding here on
Yeah.
Twitch, it's, that's a whole lot of skill sets stacked on top of each other to be able to effectively do those things. And I don't think people realize actually like intense and kind of impressive it is, and also how much work goes into those sort of things.
Yeah,
It's not like people just jump on and they're like, today I feel like doing this thing, follow along. Like that, people may say they're doing that, but
sure. And
they're
to add, it's
probably
like
not.
these are things that are not directly a part of your day to day, right? I guess in DevRel to some extent, or typical developer relations, there is some form of like, oh, you have to blog or you have to create video content or whatever, right? Like there are
Hmm.
maybe there are some goalposts that you always need to be going for. But for the most part, unless you like, if you are just somebody who's out there and they're doing a web stream every couple of days and they're engaging with the audience, unless they work for a really good manager and a really good organization, they're doing that in their free time because they're getting
Yes.
value out of it and they're seeing that this is an opportunity to reach a new audience in a new way. And I think it's very interesting as you've seen, probably over the last year, I would probably say, maybe year and a half, of went from no live stream technical content or like I guess traditional like technical web content was like here's me doing a demo for 20 minutes and maybe me doing a presentation as well. And now you're seeing all these different versions of that are far more interesting. And you're seeing more and more companies, regardless of size, like start to basically make these requirements as a part of their content packaging, right? Like I remember when our friend Jeff Fritz, when he first started doing live streaming, people are like, what are you doing? And he's like, I have an idea. And now like there's this entire, I don't want to say, there's a large segment of people that watch people code on Twitch, and that's absolutely awesome. like
Didn't Jeff wear a squirrel costume the other
like
day
I
on a
mean,
live stream?
yeah, Jeff has done
I
some.
love Jeff.
so
Jeff's
this
great. Hi,
so this is
Jeff.
so this is why Jeff is so great. For people who don't know, C Sharp First on Twitter, I'll put it in the chat as well. He is probably one of the best at engaging with an audience, and he'll do silly things like he'll wear outfits. He wore a green suit, I feel like one time he did that, so he's just a floating head.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
he's done also he yeah, I think, and the way that he engages with the community is so genuine. And I think that goes back to your statement earlier about developers love authenticity, and they
Hmm.
want to feel like the content they're consuming is genuine. And if you can do that successfully, you're going to be well regarded in this space. Like I made a comment probably 2 years ago, when I was working at Microsoft, is like people don't want to watch something online for an hour and not have to pay attention, right? Like at the end of the day, people want to pay attention or they'll just leave. Because
Hmm.
nobody, like if you're taking time out of your work day or you have something running in the background, like if you're not engaged, you're not a valid watcher. Even though you might be counting against some metric, you're really not what the goal is. You want engaged users, right?
Hmm.
Um, and it's interesting now that like engaged users is a very, very important trait or metric to measure these days. Um, and like live streaming is just one thing. Like I've seen you very active, like using Twitter Spaces, right? And I think Twitter Spaces is another like great mechanism to reach out to people. That's a little bit lighter of a lift, right? Like you don't need to set up and have your camera look good. It's literally just you go on your phone, you press a button, and you start adding people to be speakers, and that's great. And it's an amazing way. I almost think to the extent that Twitter Spaces is a genius idea and also a terrible idea because I'm like at any point in time I see like six of them at the same time, and I'm like, which one do I want to join? And that's where I start to become really tentative. It's like I feel like I really want to get value out of all this, so I would love there to be a way for like on demand versions of Twitter Spaces, right?
I
Where you
wouldn't be
could
surprised if they're working on it.
yeah,
Part of
because
like their subscription service or something. There
yeah,
you go, Twitter. If that's a new idea, I would like to claim credit and
yeah,
compensation. Thank you.
yeah. You should just file a patent right now for like just Twitter Spaces on demand. But like
Yeah, I'm gonna be verified after this.
very
Just
good,
so you know.
very good. Um, as you should be. I think the idea of verification is hilarious because it's like I'm obviously me. Just let me be verified. Maybe you need different color check marks, right? But that's a different thing. Um, I think one thing too that's really, really interesting. You mentioned something a bit back about how students or people that are new to tech or emerging into tech how their thought process is substantially different than maybe the previous generations that have been in tech. Like, what are some of the things that you're seeing that students like need as a baseline requirement as it pertains to like starting their learning journey?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. It's a little bit of a loaded question,
Of
and there's
course,
not a straight answer.
every question is loaded.
It's actually really interesting. I took part in helped run a research study probably 3 or so years back. And we found that with students, a lot of what they needed or what they expected out of their education system and going into industry actually varied a lot by country and by region. Some felt like, oh, yeah, if I finish this degree, I'm for sure going to get a job. And others were like, yeah, I can finish this degree, and there's still no guarantee that I'm going to, get a job that I want. So I think that that's kind of a fascinating aspect because typically that is, the end goal. And then you also have different cultures that value different things. Some cultures where education is first and foremost, and that is your thing, and you're going to go that way. And if there's something else that you want to do on the side, that's fine, but it takes a back seat. Where other cultures are more of a let's sprinkle a little bit of this here and a little bit of that there. And I don't think that there's any right or wrong way to do anything. I will say, based off of work I've done with students entering tech, and when I get asked a lot, like, what do companies like Microsoft, look for
Yeah,
in,
yeah,
students that are graduating and want to be developers? And the honest answer is, don't tell university recruiting I said this because I've done a lot of interviews for them. It's not your how pretty your personal website is. It's not
yeah,
how green your GitHub chart is. It's
yeah,
really about your potential. And so part of that you do show in projects that you've done and your ability to communicate, but it's really your potential and your passion. I mean, do you care? Some people don't care. They're coding because they have to code, and
hmm,
they are actually going to be they're going to bring a bad mentality to work because they just see it as, oh, I have to go and do this thing. And I'm not saying that everybody's going to love their job day in and day out. That's
sure,
not fair. But being absolutely miserable about something and or, making other people miserable about something isn't
yeah,
okay either. And so it really is. It's the potential and the passion, and the potential is showed by communication, and by project work, and of course, also by education. One of the things that I love about companies like I know Microsoft for sure. I want to say Twitter, um, a couple other companies, but they don't necessarily have requirements to apply it to things.
yeah,
You aren't required to have a bachelor's degree, or you aren't
yes,
required to have a computer science degree. Even if they're like nice to haves, those are more of just things that may make you stand out. Well, there are some other, very competitive tech companies as well. Not to name names, and I'm not going to name names, but I think people will know who you have to have the elite degree from the elite university, and you have to have x amount of knowledge in this or that, and they care about how long you've had a specific title, and they
yeah,
don't care about everything else you've done. Now, for some people, that's great because they are those developers that just love to develop. They love that challenge. Typically, they're the ones that love the algorithm and the math and just
yep,
geeking out and kind of like living in their own headspace.
sure,
And that is definitely a niche of developers, and they astonish me. I don't know how they do it. But I think a lot of people see that and kind of see that stereotype. It's the same as when you're applying to colleges. It's like, I have to get into one of the top ones.
oh sure,
And there are a lot of other top ones, but it's looking at what is their curriculum like, what do they value in their employees, or what do they value in their students, these
hmm,
sort of things as well. And so I would encourage students to kind of think more broadly that way. You're not going to have that same in-depth industry and coding experience as your more senior level peers. So instead, how are you going to portray to those interviewers, to those recruiters, what you really care about, your ambition to learn, and that you are teachable, and that you do have the potential just to grow and to help mentor others and bring good things and ideas to the company. And so I think that that would really be my top piece of advice.
yeah,
And you know what it really comes back down to? That authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
People feel like they have to have like the answers from the coding or the PM, interview
yeah.
books, or that they have to show up perfect and professionally and
Yeah.
everything. And that is the case in a lot of other industries, but it's the authenticity that's going to get you the job at the end of the day, especially in tech.
Yeah, and I think the only pushback that I'll say to that, now I loved everything that you said, is that we live in a world right now, especially for entry level jobs, like you're getting not just people that are entry level candidates, right? Like,
Yeah.
we're in a situation now where a lot of companies, they'll definitely hire someone with 2 or 3 or 4 years experience for entry level jobs because for a lot of reasons. Um, and I get asked this like I'll get a random DM on Twitter occasionally. It's like, hey, I'm a grad student and I'm really trying to get a job somewhere. What advice do you give? And like the first thing that I ask is like, okay, so what are you currently doing? And like, oh,
Hmm.
I'm going to the website and I'm clicking the application button and I'm doing that. I'm like, that's not enough
No.
because there's 10,000 other people doing that. So you need to build like I think, and this is just probably me being a bit extroverted. It's like you need to go out and figure out ways to network with people that could get you a job, right? Um, One way to do that is just asking random people on Twitter, like, how do I get a job? That's like a very low level one. But also like make yourself present in the communities that you want to be a part of. Like
Hmm.
you mentioned something about your GitHub graph. Like I agree, you don't need a GitHub graph that's all green, but you need a GitHub presence, right? You don't need the most beautiful website in the world, but you need some place to showcase the things that you've worked on or things that
Right.
you're interested in. And I think that's what's really, really challenging for people that are especially getting started is like, okay, well, I've never really built anything that's interesting. And I disagree for a lot of people because most likely if you're in a computer science practicum or a software engineering practicum or information systems practicum, you've had to build something. Like
Hmm.
whether it's a presentation or whether that it's a demo or like you had to solve an algorithm. Like
Hmm.
show off what you've been able to do. Like
Hackathons are another great one
yeah,
too.
yeah, hackathons are great, and but that's for people that are kind of entering from the traditional university or college based approach, right?
Not
There,
always.
that's true. That's actually true.
We're
Um,
actually sponsoring an organization this year in our team called Tech Together. So they focus on female, femme, and non binary people that are interested in tech.
that's awesome.
But it can be students from high school and university, but also boot campers. It
Hmm.
can be people from different industries that just want to come in and hear about the talks, totally free and everything. And so it's cool actually to kind of see that standard hackathon or that standard pathway really start to expand. And I'm that's one of the things actually I really like about working at Microsoft is that we see the value, very much see the value in those communities, and those are, the communities we're wanting to help too.
Yeah, I think in general, like you want to build up like this talent pool is not the right term, but I'm going to use the word talent pool anyway. You want to build like this generation of technologists that are going to bring forth ideas that are going to positively impact society, right? Like one of the things that I know that you work on is something like Imagine Cup, right? Like this idea of like, hey, if you have a great idea, it's probably a great idea and you should get the opportunity to actually try to build out all the way through your idea. And if you're successful in doing so, you'll be compensated for it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear more about Imagine Cup and like your thought process around why it's so important.
Yeah, so for people that aren't familiar, the Imagine Cup is a program that Microsoft has been running. It's actually our 20th anniversary this year, which is crazy to think. Um, Maybe it's older than some of our competitors. Who knows? Um, that's really weird to think. Anyways, the Imagine Cup is a annual global competition for student developers, technologists, you name it, to really come together, form teams, whether it's people that they already know or people that we help network together to make teams. And they come up with ideas to enter in one of our four categories that are more social good focused and actually build out proof of concepts, build out apps, build out projects to better their communities or to solve these different issues. And instead of a hackathon where you're doing it in maybe, say, 24 to 48 hours, you can do it over the course, of a couple months, so it doesn't have to be all stacked together.
Yeah.
I think the really neat thing about doing something like the Imagine Cup, if you're looking for project experience, amongst other things, is you're getting that community from Microsoft. So, we have a Discord channel where we have mentors in there who are full-time Microsoft employees, are Microsoft student ambassadors. You're going to get answers to all of your questions super quickly. You're going to be able to ask whatever questions, whether it's technical or not. And a lot of people, there's not a lot of other places where you can do that as a student and get those direct answers from somebody in tech, especially a very large tech company. But then as you continue in the Imagine Cup and you actually submit your project, which our submission deadline is just around the corner. So if you have a cool project, definitely go check it out. If you do you want to drop the link in
Yeah,
the chat?
I dropped the link in the chat already.
So
Yeah.
on top of it, Isaac.
I try.
And at that point, people start going through their, national competitions or their regional competitions. And as you get further and further along in the process, you actually get more and more mentoring. And it's not just mentoring about your technical project, but actually a lot of that mentoring is about how to pitch something properly, how to be able to get this whole concept down of here's the problem, here's the solution, and here's, the results. Like some people call it like the STAR philosophy or STAR practice or whatever. And they're actually getting feedback from people in industry directly. And how valuable is that as a student, being able to say, oh yeah, this Microsoft general manager gave me this feedback on these presentation skills and we nailed it down because we were able to work with them one-on-one, for a number of weeks, which is a pretty amazing opportunity at that. And then as it continues even further, in the pre-pandemic times and in the post-pandemic times,
Sure.
we actually we flew the finalists. I think it was the 4 final teams. I could be wrong, but I think there were 4, maybe 2, 4. Don't know. Anyways, we actually flew them to a number of teams that is more than 1 and is less than 5. And we flew them to Seattle from wherever they were at in the world. And this is a global competition, so they are coming from all different regions and countries to actually give their final pitch at Microsoft Build, which is Microsoft's developer conference and one of the largest developer conferences that there is. And what a cool platform and a trip to Seattle. For these students that may be coming from, India, from Pakistan, from Nigeria, you name it. And then the winners, which this just blows my mind. Winners get 100,000 US dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
They get a bunch of Azure credit and stuff too to continue building out their project. And they get a mentoring session with the CEO of Microsoft.
Yeah.
And so Satya actually meets with these students, and then usually he will say like, oh, who you should talk to? You should talk to this person. And it's another person that he knows or is connected with, maybe in their region of the world, or somebody who's an expert in the industry of their project. And so as a student entering a free competition for projects that you're probably already building as a side project, or maybe you started as a class project, or maybe you started in a hackathon. Think about just building a little bit more on that work and the amazing opportunity you could get from it. And so I think that's why I like the Imagine Cup so much, is it's not meant to be intimidating. It's growing this community of learners and builders, but with the potential for such an amazing experience and results.
Yeah, yeah, so at least for me, Imagine Cup is a very humbling experience because every single time I watch it, I see some idea and I'm like, I could have never thought of that ever in my entire life. And I will never say that I am the best developer. I am probably just an okay developer, to quote a friend of ours. One of the world's most okayest developer.
That is far beyond that, but yes.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's it's so, at least for me, refreshing seeing the ideas that can be built from the next generation of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something to say that's very intoxicating about the next generation and the problems that they care about solving. Like, I believe the winner from last year was working with accessibility for health what's the word I'm thinking of? They're trying to figure out ways to get healthcare or different healthcare mechanisms to people in underdeveloped areas, right? I don't remember the exact, like, I'm obviously spitballing of what exactly it was, but I remember it was about health. It was about healthcare, or not healthcare, but
Hmm.
medical
And health
assistance.
health is one of our
Yeah.
4 categories that students can enter in. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think like you see that, or I think a couple years ago, like somebody was measuring blood sugar levels using like an eye sensor. Like I've seen that as an example too. It's like these are things that as society develops, we need problems to solve. And we can't expect every big company on the planet to solve all of these issues. They need to be scrappy startups or people that are building something in the open source space to solve these problems. And it's really, really exciting to see companies of all sizes take advantage of this, and Microsoft to kind of champion this, next generation of developers, which I think is great. I've always loved the Imagine Cup too because everybody's super excited just to be there. Like I think obviously winning 100 grand and the conversation with the CEO of Microsoft is great, but like everybody is so excited to be there because they understand the potential for what they're trying to accomplish, and more than likely, and this is just me being blunt, every single person who gets on Imagine Cup is going to have a decent job at some point, right? Like you're not going to have very many situations where, you lose the Imagine Cup or you don't win the Imagine Cup and then you immediately like have to start working in some other non-tech industry, right?
Yeah. No.
I think a lot of people have, it's a great catalyst for their careers.
Well,
Um,
we talked about this
yeah.
earlier. It's all about the potential and the
Yes.
passion. And if you're competing in the Imagine Cup, and especially if you're making it that far, you've clearly got both. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. I think that's like the biggest thing that I see with the Imagine Cup specifically is it just gives people the opportunity to care about or try to fix the things they care about or try to come up with solutions for the problems that they're seeing in their local communities or the community at large.
Yeah.
That me, as somebody with bias or privilege, like I'm not aware of. Like
Hmm.
I live in the United States, I'm a straight white guy, my life's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
And everybody else that's not in my demographic, they have challenges they have to deal with every single day. And I'm not aware of them because of a lot of reasons. And it's things like this make it visible to me. And then I'm like, oh, I wasn't aware of this was a problem and I should care about it. And
Yep.
that's really
And how
important
can
for
I help?
for my personal
Yeah,
growth, right? Because I see everything as
absolutely.
I'm very self-centered. So everything has to be like, how can Isaac benefit from this? And it's like, oh, Isaac can become a better person if he pays more attention to these things.
I don't think that you are a self-centered person by any means, but I agree that there are
Thank you.
always learning opportunities. Um, I think that that's actually a really cool, not necessarily evolution of the Imagine Cup, but a generational evolution. So a lot of people, when I tell them I work with student developers, they're thinking millennials, right? Well, hate to
Yeah,
break it to you all, but you're already working with all of the millennials. I am the end of the millennials.
sure.
All of the millennials are in their late 20s to like early, I think it's about 40 now. Some people argue. Let's say end of
I'm
your
35
20s
and a
to
millennial.
late,
I'm
yeah,
35
to
and a
late
millennial. Yeah,
30s.
yeah.
So, um, this generation actually has already started entering is actually Gen Z.
Mm-hmm.
And Gen Z is very different from millennials. Gen Z cares a lot about social good and impact, not accepting things for the way that they are, equality across many different fronts, intersectionality, all of these different things. And they care about them as a generation.
Yes.
And so seeing them take these things that they've cared about for so long that as millennials, I don't think we were as exposed to, that we're getting exposed to now and that we're caring about now and trying to do things about. They've been doing their whole lives and they've had technology their whole lives. And so seeing them being able to start thinking about this and implementing these things, it's like this whole other level
Yes.
of, oh my gosh, like, I'm maybe, 5, 10 years older than some of them. And I'm like, you're gonna take my job tomorrow.
Yes.
It's just it's amazing and it comes from that passion, from that knowledge, but the problems they're solving are on this whole other scale and there's so much authenticity behind them. And so uh, Gen Z actually have submitted a talk to a conference. I'm not going to name what conference to not jinx myself, but I actually submitted a talk about, bringing Gen Z into developer communities.
That's great.
Um, Um,
And
but
if you don't get accepted, just do the talk and post it online because I
there you
imagine a lot
go.
of people will take value out of it. But
Thank
also
you.
submit it to every single conference that you have an opportunity to.
Well, thanks. Um, but I have a lot of faith in Gen Z coming up. They're not just on TikTok all day. In fact, yes, they probably watch TikTok, but I know a lot more people in their 40s that are watching TikTok every day. I have people on my team sending me TikToks. I'm like, I have a TikTok account and I don't even use it. So like, don't assume too much or stereotype too much. Gen Z is a very powerful generation coming in. They're going to be a really, really good force of good and force of change, I think, not only in the tech industry, um, but really for the world. And I know that sounds cheesy, but it is just
No,
the truth.
yeah,
And and I think the other thing I'd want to add, and I know we're coming up to our close here,
sure.
I actually gave a well, I was gonna say a few weeks ago, but it was back at like the beginning of December.
Oh, yeah,
Um, I got COVID at the beginning of the year from a
yeah.
family member, and so those 2 weeks of my life just don't exist. And then it was the holidays, and anyways, I gave a keynote at one of our Tech Together, well, not our Tech Together hackathons, but at Tech Together's hackathon. And I talked about the importance, especially for students, for people who are entering tech, and anybody that has imposter syndrome, which I think is everyone, is thinking about your strengths and how much more important that is than focusing on your weaknesses. Because you can gradually improve upon your weaknesses, whether you see that as tech or communication or whatever. That's practice, it's training, it's research, etc. But a lot of us have these natural, well, everybody has their natural strengths and the things
Sure.
that have come, easier to them. And if you focus on improving those are actually going to grow exponentially. So, yes, it's important to, grow your weaknesses because we all want to learn and get better, but your strengths are going to grow exponentially. And so we had a really good conversation um, at that hackathon about that. And I actually recommended that students, and I think a lot of people have maybe heard of it before, but a company called Gallup, they do something called Strengths Finder. It's a book you can buy online. You can just go buy a code from their website, whatever it is. This is not an ad. They do not pay me to promote this.
Sure.
Um, but I first took it when I was in college as a part of one of the leadership programs I was a part of. And you take this long quiz thing, um, and it spits out 5 like words or phrases to you. And these are your top 5 strengths according to, what you've put in. And the longer that I've been when I was doing those leadership things and that I've been in industry, how relevant those are and how
Yeah.
important those are, and things that that I was being told about myself before I realized them about myself. For example, we were talking about Wordle at the beginning of this
Yes.
chat today, and competitive is one of mine. But I'm not competitive with everybody else. I'm
Sure.
competitive with myself. Like I
Yeah.
said, I'll take longer than 5 minutes because I want to challenge myself to solve it in less. Another one, and actually it was the first time I had ever heard the word, was ideation. And that comes
Yes.
back to that creativity and being able to come up with new ideas and new approaches in solving communication. A lot of people think I'm an extrovert. That is actually not true. I am actually an introvert. Um, Extroverted introvert,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Yeah.
Um, but I still love chatting with people, and I think communication in all forms, like we've also talked about today, whether that's written form, in blogs or emails or whatever it may be, whether it's being on video, whether it's joining Twitter Spaces, communication is so important on so many fronts. Um, and so just thinking about those things I had gotten from StrengthsFinder then was kind of cool, but it's also cool now seeing how those things become entangled more in my life and how much more they are important to not only me but to my career. And
Yes.
so I would encourage anybody that is really suffering with imposter syndrome right now, or is maybe looking for, okay, what do I want to do next with my life or my career? What side projects do I want to work on in order to gain some new experience? Go think about what your strengths are and not just what your weaknesses are. Um, and go and build upon them, because I think it's a really empowering thing, and it's going to be the thing that helps you grow and get out of your comfort zone more than just saying, oh, well, I can't do that. I'm not smart enough, or I don't know how to code enough to enter the Imagine Cup, or
Sure.
I'm not going to go to a hackathon because it's too intimidating. And so I think it's really just that self-empowerment. And so I think
Yeah.
that would kind of be my final advice to students early in career of, harness those strengths because all of us have them. And it's how you use those that are really what's going to allow you to go far and find your niche and find what you're happy doing.
Yeah, and I love everything that you just said. I also say this too. Like there is not a demand. There's not a supply issue with tech jobs. There is a surplus issue. There are too many tech jobs and not enough technologists, right? So I tell
Yes.
people what you can do to find your way or whatever. I say pick what you find interesting and just go
Mm-hmm.
for it.
Yeah.
You don't have to be, you don't need to know all of these high level computer science principles. You don't need to be like the best CSS stylist of all time. You don't need to know the ins and outs of some product that you've heard about. You don't need to care about Web3. You don't need to like all of these things, right? You don't need to any of them. Find what you have interest in. If it's in tech, you will find a job. Because
Yes.
if you like writing, there are jobs for people who write. If you like trying to figure out how to fix problems, there are jobs for that. If you care about things being slow or things being unperformant, there are jobs for that. And for the most part, everybody has some skill if they want to be into tech that they could get a job for right away. It's all about visibility of that role, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the next step in this evolution of tech, I think, is like figuring out better ways to amplify jobs. Because
Absolutely.
I think in general, like the current legacy process where you go to some company and you submit an application and then you get weeded through like 4,000 other applicants via some AI,
If you're
and
lucky, yeah.
if you're
Yeah,
lucky,
exactly. By the
yeah,
AI.
but some AI, and then you get maybe is a recruiter gets an email, internal recruiter, and then they send you an email, and then you have a conversation, and then maybe
And then you
down the
get
line you get
ghosted.
down the line you get a job or whatever, or you get ghosted. There has to be um, a more scalable solution, especially since we're looking for tech job people to fill tech jobs right now. What I'm seeing in tech is just a surplus of just random recruiters just coming into the space and just mass messaging
Oh, yeah.
everybody. I know that's
Get
been
on
around.
LinkedIn,
Yeah,
people. Get on LinkedIn.
exactly.
If you're not on there, clean up your profile and get on there because
Yeah, yeah,
and
and
everybody's sharing the jobs they have open. Hiring managers are posting their jobs and
yes,
saying, DM me if this is something that sounds cool. That's how you beat out the 7,000 other applicants living in the
yep,
black hole of random submissions, like you were talking about earlier. When you could just go talk to the hiring manager
yeah.
who then goes to their recruiter and is like, yo, I met this
Pull
person.
this
They're super
resume.
cool.
Yeah,
I want them to go through the interview loops.
yeah,
And so yeah, I think that that's
yeah.
really the way that you kind of take advantage of the technology and the networking we have, even if we're not able to do a lot in person right now.
Hmm.
And I love what you said about, focusing on what you're interested in. I would say also focus on what you're interested in truly learning about, not
Yes.
because it's like, you know, blockchain or Web3 or
The
whatever. I
new
mean, if
hot
that
the new
actually
hotness.
interests
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
go with it. But if it doesn't, um, and take some of those risks to learn about new things. I think one of the big privileges we do have in tech because of the job surplus is the ability to move and the ability to explore. So worst
Hmm.
comes to worst and you don't like it or it's not what you expected, you move. I've had three different roles at Microsoft in 5 years. It
Yeah.
has not negatively affected my career growth. In fact, I think I'm more well-rounded because
Hmm.
of it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I don't have anything to lose. Even if I were to fail at something, I still learned something.
Yep.
So I think with that privilege in tech, that's something that more people could take the opportunity on as well.
Like you just hit everything on the head, and I think that's a perfect way as we kind of wrap up. I love the idea of like figuring out more effective ways to build that next generation. And our friend Tim just says that the mug that I'm drinking is too big. So thanks,
Yeah,
Tim.
can we see that mug?
Yeah. Well, my kid made it for me, so like it's not. I mean, it is big, but I also have very small hands, so I don't know. Anyway,
Looks
um,
more like a soup mug. Are you sure it's not a soup
it's
bowl
got
with a
a hand.
handle?
It's got well, do soup bowls have
A bowl can
handles?
have a handle. A
All
bowl
right.
can have a handle.
Okay. Well, news to me.
This sounds like it's going to be a Twitter poll.
Uh, well, I will vote and I'll say no. Um, so as we wrap up, Morgan, I want to thank you so much for hopping on and chatting with me. This is a great conversation about kind of that figuring out ways to effectively, engage with the newer generations that are coming into tech, or people that are coming into tech fresh from other careers. Because I think at the end of the day, the goal should be to make tech in the future better than tech currently, from a technology
Absolutely.
standpoint, from a culture standpoint, from everything. And it's great to hear that you're a part of the big machine that is helping make it better. So as we wrap up, I love to ask my guests one very silly question. So would you?
Uh-oh.
It's not that silly, honestly. So when you think of tech and the community around it and all the things that matter, at least from your point of view, like what's the one word that comes to mind?
This is super cheesy. You ready?
Only cheesy answers allowed.
It's such a Microsoft answer too. Empower.
Ooh, I use Empower a lot though, but like I think that's because I used to work at
It's such a
Microsoft.
Probably, but I think it's such a great encompassing word. It means helping other people learn. It means providing opportunities to other people. It means providing confidence and skilling and just, I don't know. I think empowerment is so important, and there are so many different versions and ways that you can empower people. Um, I think a lot of the movements and everything we've seen in the world too are just it's all empowerment. And even for communities, if we don't have those community leaders and we don't have people putting that time in for open source, if we don't have people maintaining those projects or contributing to them, um, we're not those things just wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
And so it's empowering people to be able to do those things and then passing that on to help others as well.
Yeah, you're very spot on. I love, even though it might be a cliche phrase in some circles, I think empower is a perfect way to think about ways to do better, and I really appreciate that. So as we wrap up, do you have any parting things to say for folks who might not be following Morgan on Twitter? It's live love geek. So check her out if you haven't had the opportunity to do so yet. But do you have any parting words, Morgan?
Um, I think we've covered a lot of great stuff today. I really enjoyed the conversation. Seriously, though, um, I my DMs are open. On Twitter. I am on Instagram and everything too. Same username. Keep it consistent.
Yep.
All that good branding stuff. Live, love, geek. Um, but I love having conversations with people. I post lots of pictures of my cute dogs. And if you don't like dogs, then you probably don't want to follow me. And also, why don't you like dogs? But yes,
Uh-oh.
I'm always looking to chat with new people, especially developers, get their feedback. So yeah, thanks so much, Isaac, for having me on the show. And hopefully, I didn't do too terrible job that one day in the future you'll have me back.
No, no, we'll definitely look to have you on in the future. Like this was a great conversation. And thank you everybody for tuning in and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.